Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 13 Monday Night Football edition with a twist, my friends. And every now and again, there are certain events in the sporting landscape that calls for an alteration of plans. And yesterday, when the College Football Playoff Committee released their field of four, we felt it was time around the home offices to alter our Monday format. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by Payne Insider, but a very special guest stepping into the hot seat on a Monday morning, Brad Powers. And Brad, do you feel comfortable on Monday, ready to handle and at least either throw kerosene on the fire with Payne or to try and calm him down a little bit given everything that we saw unfold with the College Football Playoff Committee?
Yeah, there'll be more kerosene, gasoline, whatever explosive thing you can think of, more than laid back Monday morning. I'm ready to go. I'm fired up.
Yeah,
I've been the quietest person on this
100%,
topic,
and it scares 100%, and it scares me. I'm not gonna lie, it scares me when you've gone this quiet, this introverted. There's been no rage, no frustration, other than maybe one tweet, and that's about the extent of it.
I think when we lined this up and changed course for Monday, I said with our ability as professional bettors and logical college football fans for many decades now between us, the amount of games we watch weekly, and also knowing the corporate side of things in the sports space, right? Having dealt with it individually and Bet the Board as a company, we can probably have the best conversation on the playoff committee's decision to exclude Florida State better than anybody. And we can do it without holding back since we own the platform. So here Brad is. We're throwing the old 12-6 curveball for listeners on a Monday morning, and whether it's 8 minutes or 48 minutes, to us, this is the far better conversation than talking Steelers football and what they didn't achieve yesterday.
Yes, I would agree. And Brad, it's also convenient that Payne doesn't have to revisit the Chiefs' offensive performance at Lambeau Field last night on this Monday morning, too. So he's able to kill two birds with one stone. But the impetus for this show, not only the College Football Playoff Committee's unveiling of their Final Four, but a tweet, Brad, that you sent out yesterday that Payne said, you know what, this is what we have to discuss, and we're going to use our platform to take advantage. And the tweet was, and I'll read it directly as you sent it out, the committee did not pick the four best teams and did not pick the four most deserving teams, a remarkable feat. I'll give you a chance to expound on that, and we can take this a variety of different ways.
Yeah, I'll start with the easiest, and that's the most deserving teams. Obviously, if you're going on deserving, I would say that an undefeated Power 5 conference champion probably is among the four most deserving teams, just for the fact that we've never seen an unbeaten Power 5 champ ever, even enter the thought process of getting left out of the four-team college football playoff. And yet Florida State, because of a key injury to the quarterback a couple games ago, gets left out. Unprecedented that they don't put a team like that in. The other deserving teams, obviously Michigan and Washington, unbeaten Power 5 conference champs, deserved in. I would say the other team would have been Texas. You're talking about a conference champ who owns the tiebreaker, that being a head-to-head win over the other conference champ from the SEC in Alabama. So if we were just going off of what the committee's done for the previous 9 years of the playoff era, or most other years in the history of the sport, the most deserving teams would have been Michigan, Washington, Florida State, and Texas. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. Pretty simple. But we'll get into this. You started getting feelers out the week, forget Saturday and Sunday. How about the week leading up to it? You started to get the feelers, and the talking points must have come down from up high, because certain high-profile individuals are going on certain podcasts, and you're hearing, most deserving versus best, something that you just haven't heard throughout the previous 9 years. And let's talk about best. This is something that people can't really fail to grasp. But if we wanted to do best, I got news for you. Obviously, Florida State wouldn't be among the best. I mean, I wouldn't even put them in my top 15 right now as far as the power rating.
And I don't think any of us would have. So that was the one thing that Payne gave me a hard time, Brad. He said, you're getting into it with everybody. I go, look, I've never said Florida State was the best. I said they were most deserving. You'd have to be on a planet so far from Mars to think that Florida State power rated inside the top 4 with the current quarterback situation. But sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
No, that's fine. So, and that's the thing. It's not even about Florida State when we're talking best. If you truly wanted the best in there, then we got to get Washington out of there because they're not one of the best teams. Oh, what do you mean? They're unbeaten. Well, they were just in their very last game, data point, 10-point underdog against Oregon, which means they'd also be obviously an underdog against Michigan, Alabama, and let's just talk about teams not even in the playoffs. Or they would be. I don't think people realize this. They would be, if they had to play Oregon again, guess what? They'd be an underdog against the Oregon Ducks again. You're not moving teams' power ratings 10 points off of one data point at the end of the season. They'd be an underdog against Penn State, Texas, all these teams, Ohio State. So get Washington out of there if you wanted the best teams. Obviously, if you want the best teams, you're getting Georgia. Well, Georgia should be in the playoff if you want the best teams. You don't believe me? Look no further than point spread. The 5.5-point favorite against Alabama. I know they lost the game out. Right, this number 1 team in the country now, Michigan's laying 1.5 on a neutral against Alabama. So Georgia should be in there, and I'm also here to tell you, Ohio State's probably in there as well. So take Texas out. So if we're truly talking best teams, who would be favored over who on a neutral field? They didn't get it right. Not even close.
Can we talk about Georgia for a second, guys? I don't ever like to cry about spilled milk, and our listeners know that we had over for a best bet. I think you were on it as well, Brad. What is Kirby Smart doing with that offensive game plan? I mean, you watch a team that goes out there, has a dynamic passing attack. They slice up Alabama on the opening drive, and you go, you know what? Georgia's figured out how you have to attack this Alabama secondary, get them into a point of conflict. And Kirby almost went, you know what? That was too easy. Let's handcuff ourselves and try and establish the run. And we're not even going to run between the tackles. We're going to try and lean on our running backs to get outside the edge against Alabama's speed athletes and physicality. And we're not even going to abandon the ground game when we're chasing a 17-7 deficit.
I will let Payne attack that.
Can I tell you what I think? It backfired. There isn't anyone that knows Alabama better than Kirby Smart. He's been in that program for how long? He's been with Nick Saban for how long? I truly believe Kirby and Bobo got in a room and there are hundreds of analysts and said, oh my God. They popped on the film and they're like, Alabama stinks. And we're going to be able to run on first down, run on second down. We're going to punt it away. And even though our defense isn't playing great, we're going to take the only throw away from Jalen Milroe that he can make, and that's a deep shot. We'll put a spy on him, and inevitably he'll be able to run a little bit because he's just that athletic, but we're going to make him throw the 7 to 12-yard pass consistently. And he wasn't able to do that. And I think that's where Alabama comes into this conversation with their resume, because on the surface, it's like, oh my God, 12-1 conference champion. Just beat Georgia, the perceived best team in the country, even though we told you Georgia was way down this season. And then it's like you got Nick Saban, you got the Alabama brand. This is the same team that lost to Texas at home by 2 scores. They struggled with Ole Miss, struggled with A&M, who didn't have its starting quarterback, barely beat 4-win Arkansas at home, was trailing to LSU at home before Heisman winner Jaden Daniels left with an injury. The same LSU, by the way, that Florida State beat by 3 touchdowns on a neutral. It's like how quickly we forgot that Alabama needed 4th and goal from the 31 to beat 6-win Auburn team that just lost to New Mexico State in that very same building as a 4-touchdown favorite. And that New Mexico State team just lost its conference championship game by 2 scores. Everyone this season was down. We said that coming in, and that was kind of what made everything so difficult. Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, they were all down relative to where they had finished the past couple of seasons. I mean, you even think about the last month, some of these teams in the college football playoff. Michigan snuck past Maryland, barely. Washington barely beat 5-win Wazoo. Probably could have lost at home to Arizona State. Texas squeaked past TCU, who was losing at one point by damn near 40 to Oklahoma. And so all of these teams have had snafus because none of them are perfect. None of them are as good as what the top 4 or 5 or 6, 7 teams in college football have been in the last handful of years.
Some of the logic that I saw on social media cracked me up. And just to kind of put things in perspective, my favorite was the defensive Alabama being one of the 4 teams in the mix because they had the best loss out of all 4 teams. But that was a reason they should have gotten in ahead of Texas. I'm going, how is that possible? On what planet? Because you lose to a team that's a good quality loss, that somehow catapults you over them. Because the SEC is this grueling gauntlet in Texas, because losing to Oklahoma in the Red River Shootout, I guess, is equivalent to losing to an NAIA program. Not a 10-win Oklahoma team that's one of your most bitter rivals, but Alabama's trending in a better direction. They have the best win of the season. To your point, Payne, I mean, they needed something basically from the heavens itself to get through Auburn the week before at Jordan-Hare. And you mentioned, how tightly bunched up these teams are. Brad, you have power ratings going back a number of years. Can you remember a season since we started the college football playoff where there are this many teams separated by such a slim margin, a point here, a point there? It feels like the Clemsons, Georgias, and Alabamas of the world were always a touchdown plus, and it was a question of who they were going to annihilate in the semifinals to even get to the championship game.
No, we know in the 10 years, and I basically started my own power ratings basically at the start of the playoff era. Not at any point have we had 7, 8, 9, 10 teams bunched up as close as what it is. And if you don't believe me, I mean, just look at, like you mentioned, almost all the semifinal point spreads consistently were a touchdown. In many cases, were double digits. I mean, when Notre Dame was in there, they were 2 touchdown underdog against Clemson and like an 18.5 point underdog against Alabama. So, but we're just obviously you already see the point spreads out for this year's 2 semifinals, and I mean with the 5.5 point spread combined between the two, that has to be the shortest we've ever seen.
It's so crazy to me when you look at all this stuff and they dance between the raindrops with the language that's out there. And my joke, and I'm not sure committee members would have felt this way, or if I was in the room, I'd have done it. My biggest FU to all of college football would have been to the SEC. Well, you know what? Technically, Texas getting in over Alabama, that's your SEC champion. They're going to be in your league next year, so you do have an entrant into the college football playoff. Florida State runs the table. They deserve to be in the mix. And that's the real troubling part, because when you look at last year, TCU finishes the year 12-1. There were a number of folks that were looking to try and keep them on the outside looking in, had lost the conference championship, clearly weren't one of the 4 best teams from a power rating perspective, but it put together a resume that was deserving. What do they do in their opening game? They go out there, upset Michigan as more than a touchdown underdog, and it almost felt to me that what hurts Florida State in this particular spot, Payne, was Georgia annihilating TCU last year, that the committee went, you know what, we've lived through this before, and if Florida State were to pull off a semifinal win, we're not sure we want a potentially national championship game that gets that lopsided, even if that wasn't anywhere close to being the case, given how many NFL caliber athletes you had on this Florida State defense, regardless of who was starting under center.
I think a lot of things were unfortunate for Florida State this year. You get the big win, suddenly LSU's defense is horrific. And so LSU ends the season with 3 losses. Clemson going in there and beating them. We know Clemson's far superior than the win and loss record. Have some fumble mishaps against Duke. Have the 3rd unlikeliest loss of the entire week to Miami. Even last week, right? Kentucky kind of luck boxes their way into a win against Louisville with the kickoff return. So all of these things have been trending horrifically for Florida State. The crazy part to me is the college football playoffs have not been competitive. And I wish I kept the tweet, but someone said basically from the inception up until 2 years ago, the average college football playoff game had been decided by like 19 points. Yeah. So these weren't close. They've never been close. And so, I'm going to protect Todd as I always do here with the corporate side of stuff. And, this is our platform, so I can kind of speak freely. And, I don't ever need a corporate check, but we've kind of reached a point where in front of our face, the playoff committee and Brad hinted the use of ESPN threw out a bunch of word salad over the last week. Whichever describing word best fit their bias, right? Is it the 4 best, of which it's never been? Is it the 4 most deserving? Or is it a combination of both? And every single year to this point, it's been the foremost deserving with a sprinkle of data and common sense when using the best, when there's a tie, so to speak, or a really close debate. There's no repercussions for the decision this time. A new precedent isn't being set. And the committee understood that, and they took advantage of it. They knew people would be outraged, sure, but they can deal with it for a week. So for the very first time, this is the final year of a 4-year playoff, which means the committee isn't actually setting a precedent. And so they can make this horrific decision, which also behooves them financially.
Yep.
So let's get our partner ESPN to help with the crime, right? And then wash our hands of it because we're moving to 12 teams next year. We don't have to live with the negatives of what we've said this moment moving forward because the future of college football is changing. And so the committee and ESPN knew they could get away going this route. I mean, you saw all of ESPN's top mouth breathers getting on board the last 7 to 10 days, influencing through media.
There was one dissenter, and it was Booger McFarland. He was the one dissenter in all of it.
RG3 was there. And
RG3's got ties to FSU, so he's got to make sure that he creates a symbiotic home life from time to time.
Yes, but you think about this, right? It's like the SEC brings the most dollars. Hard to find a way to not include them, right? It can't be Georgia because they lost outright to Bama, and Bama is the conference champ. But if we include Bama, then we have to include Texas. And the thought process all of a sudden is like, oh, fuck yeah, this is perfect. ESPN is in a joint venture that owns the Longhorn Network. SEC and ESPN are in business and form the SEC Network. And for the multiple ACC members on the playoff committee, oh, shit, we just figured out a way to not have to pay FSU a check for $10 million for making the playoff. Fuck yeah, let's do that. So the business decision to exclude Florida State was just too good from every angle. SEC Network and Bama, Longhorn Network in Texas, no massive lump for FSU. And if we finagle this just right, we can have a Disney-like movie set up of Saban versus Harbaugh in what could be one or both their final games. So it was like check mark, check mark, check mark, check mark.
Yep.
And this is how it all unfolded, regardless of if anyone wants to believe it. But, I mean, you even had Heather Denich coming out the night before, telling you the exact four and the exact placement of it. And so it's difficult when you have to kind of explain that to a bunch of seniors that came back for this very moment. And, unfortunately, this is it's not just a Florida State thing. I mean, I think all of college football purists understand what happened, and we now understand that, hey, this is a job. And some of the rumblings internally, right? Like Mike Norvell is a different kind of cat, right? He kind of believes in college football. And I think last night for the first time, he was like, holy shit, this is now 100% a business.
I mean, it's those brutal realities that are there, and I think you lay out, a extremely compelling economic case in terms of why some of these things happen the way they do. And Brad, I'll kind of come back to you with, the question that I was left asking myself. If Georgia beats Alabama, does the committee still put Texas in over Florida State as the fourth team? Or because they don't have that Alabama against Texas data point, they feel justified with Florida State's defensive performance against Ville that Florida State gets in as one of the four teams with Georgia being the other?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't heard anybody brought that up. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, thinking about that. I'm not sure that they've actually put Texas in because you already have the moneymaker, Georgia. You're going to give them a break, so to speak, by giving them a semifinal game against the Noles. No, I think it would have been just too simple. You got 4 unbeaten conference champs. You just put them all 4 in. So, no, I think Florida State would have been in.
Let me ask this. So there was one tweet and one text that I saw yesterday that I think is probably a very good topical discussion. So the first was a tweet from Ryan McChrystal of Sharp Football. He is one of the best draft prognosticators there is of the last decade. He sent out this tweet: if Florida State is so much worse without Jordan Travis, then why were they part of the 4 heading into the week?
Yeah.
Why did they finish ranked 5th ahead of both Georgia and Ohio State? Why not drop them down substantially? Because we all know odds makers would have Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon favored over FSU.
You want to know the reason, Payne? The reason is simple. It's so they could put Florida State against Georgia in the Orange Bowl and claim it was the two teams closest to getting to the college football playoff there, and it kills two birds with one stone. You give the matchup of 5 versus 6 to add a little bit of intrigue to another bowl game, and you know in the back of their mind the committee is hoping and praying that Georgia had their full complement of players, went out there, beat Florida State handsomely. They can pat themselves on the back and go, look, America, we saved you guys the potential of Florida State getting blown out in the college football playoff. That's why we gave you this game. It's just like the NCAA tournament committee does all the time. And while I don't agree with a lot of the things Alan Boston says, it's why they play the mid-majors that we think can make deep runs against one another in a 7-10 matchup and 8 versus 9, because they don't want to see those mid-majors potentially knock off the perennial blue bloods that take money out of TV networks' pockets the deeper we get into March.
I'm hoping there's some collusion there. I'm hoping that Kirby and Mike, boy, they looked like a mess on the Orange Bowl teleconference yesterday. Neither of them wanted to be there. I'm hoping they collude. I'm hoping that they say, hey, we're going to take the 15 extra practices, get our young guys implemented. We're going to head down to South Beach, enjoy a nice vacation. We're going to take the per diem and the financials, and all of a sudden Holly Rose is going to talk to Mike Norvell before the game, and he's going to say, hey, our main goal and focus here is to protect the players and keep them healthy. And for 60 minutes, both teams just take knees. That would be awesome. I would absolutely love to see that.
It would be the most incredible theater ever if that actually unfolded. Kind of like we said should have happened between the Chargers and Raiders in that Sunday night football game to close out the regular season. And they weren't willing and able to try and pull that off. And maybe Florida State and Georgia have that trick up their sleeve. Because I can tell you one thing, Payne, you sent that interview that they were both doing about some of their bowl obligations. I'm not sure which head coach looked more shell-shocked in the moment. Kirby just had this blank stare on his face, and Norvell, you could see, just was trying to do everything he could not to go off on a tangent, not to use it as a vent session, doing everything in his power and physical constraint to repress some of that frustration, given everything that had unfolded, 4 to 6 hours prior.
And he handled it like
a consummate
true professional. Yeah, I mean, he was livid, and he said, hey, ask me these questions on a different platform out of respect for the Orange Bowl committee. The other text I got, and this kind of brings it back to the gambling side, Billy, who our NFL listeners know through the years of writing and then obviously on the podcast this season, is a Buffalo Bills fan, diehard. He texted me, we obviously know Florida State isn't one of the top 4 teams, but if the NFL playoffs started today, the Browns would be in the playoffs over the Buffalo Bills. The Bills would be a 9-point favorite on a neutral right now. So why isn't the same logic of earning it on the field being used? I thought that was really interesting and tying it into some of our NFL listeners who expected an NFL podcast.
I mean, it's the same kind of thing, and the college football playoff, unfortunately, is more an invitational than what players can earn on the field, because I agree. I mean, you deprive everyone else on that roster of an opportunity, and I can't even imagine in any other sport, if it's the NFL, you go, you know what, the other 252 men on the active roster, if the Bengals were, say, to put together an improbable run, everything you've accomplished without Joe Burrow means nothing, because he's a 7.5-point downgrade with Jake Browning under center than what you're going to get with your starting quarterback. And for me, not to be on the ivory tower or sit on a throne, but I think it sends an absolutely horrific message to college football in general, where you have all of these head coaches bitching and moaning about the transfer portal and the players looking out for themselves. You want to know why they're looking out for themselves? Because of shit like this that tells you if your starting quarterback goes down, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how much you exceed odds makers' expectations by, which in the case of Florida State was covering in Gainesville against Florida, or winning by double digits despite some of the sharpest money in the market moving Louisville to the favorite. It doesn't matter. I mean, just hang it up. As soon as Jordan Travis broke his leg, you should have taken off your pads, left the game in the middle of the second quarter against North Alabama, because everything that you had worked for as a team had been completely dashed. And the other thing that I was asking, what did Florida State have to do against Louisville? If they had won that game 42-0, would that have somehow changed the dynamic? Were they given even the benefit of the doubt that it wasn't just their second string quarterback, that it was a third string quarterback? quarterback and that Tate Rodemaker would have been healthy, recovering from a concussion a month later. I mean, there were so many things that were there that sent me all the way back to the Cardale Jones team at Ohio State. I know they blasted Wisconsin 59-0, but were they not going to get in if they won that game 10-7? There is no chance back then that they would have kept Ohio State out if they had snuck by Wisconsin the same way they did to Florida State.
And why? Because, obviously Ohio State brings in TV dollars.
Yep.
I mean, I start to wonder, and it's now very clear that if Georgia had won, FSU is still out. And now in my mind, I'm starting to play it out. It's like, what if Jordan Travis was even healthy? Are they finagling it this way as well? Like, the result didn't matter. And that's the crazy part of even thinking of it in that way. And you hit this perfectly. I don't know the committee's understanding of these actual teams. I mean, FSU played a third-string true freshman quarterback on a neutral in a championship game, and it's actually worse than that sounds. Brock Glenn missed 6 weeks of his freshman year with thumb surgery. In the second quarter, and you can go back and watch, and I'm shocked he still was in the game. Against Louisville, he hyperextended his knee and was forced into a brace and played at about 65%. And somehow everyone was focused on what FSU's offense wasn't doing in that situation. But we all just let J.J. McCarthy in Michigan put up less offensive output without a fucking word. Like, does the committee know that in 30 days, a guy who was concussed and almost played in this spot, QB2, would have been available, would have had 15 practices where Mike Norvell could actually fit a system to him rather than have him try to operate Jordan Travis's offense and a week's notice? That in another 30 days, an NFL prospect along FSU's defensive line becomes eligible in Darrell Jackson. I don't think they know this stuff. And it's crazy to me that they're in a position and probably don't know this, or as we just talked about, financially, don't care.
Don't care.
Yeah, don't
I think
care.
that's the scariest part of all, is that I think they legitimately don't care. And, one of the friends of the program, Tailgate 10 had a tweet going, you know what, maybe Florida State should have just said Jordan Travis was questionable with a lower body injury, and he might have returned for a college football playoff semifinal, even if he had undergone surgery. Kept the entire medical report under wraps going, you know what, he might return, so we definitely deserve to get in because we have our starting quarterback. We're clearly one of the 4 most deserving teams in the country.
And if the leg injury wasn't so gruesome and played all over social media, I think they could have got away with that. I mean, you just heard Sark. They asked him about Xavier Worthy after the game. The man is in like crutches and a full leg boot, and like, you should be fine, should be good, right? And he's protecting. Now the crazy part is, like, we got this Jaden Daniels Heisman future. If the committee's in charge, I mean, Jordan Travis has got to win the Heisman in a landslide now. You just told the world he's the most valuable player with this decision, didn't you? I just, the other part that's crazy to me, and I got a chuckle out of this, and maybe we wrap it with this, but it's like, I try to stay off social, and I probably should be a better tweeter when you have a company and a product, but it's a cesspool out there.
Fact.
But you start to look at some of the bettors, and I saw more of the louder social media bettors that were clinging to the idea of 4 best, doing so because they wanted the very best games possible for entertainment purposes and viewing pleasure. And I'm thinking, motherfucker, you just spent part of your weekend watching Prairie View and FAMU. Like, you'd watch 2 idiots and a drool off if you could bet on it. Yep. Nobody wants to hear about what you deem entertaining. And as a bettor, you should be hoping for the best opportunity to profit. And the best opportunity is now gone. That opportunity was seeing Michigan open 11.5, 12 against FSU, have all the talking heads for 30 days, pound the table about how FSU didn't belong, have all the public latch on to that narrative, and take 13.5, maybe 14 at post with the better defense and a better schematic head coach, because FSU's defensive line, now that they've stopped bamboozling onlookers because they rotated guys all season and stopped doing that in the most meaningful games, and you saw what their defensive line was, I think that might have been your best opportunity to profit in the college football playoff. I really do.
I mean, Brad got swept up in some of the college football shrapnel that was out there, as I felt like I was getting myself into fights with just about everybody Saturday night trying to defend Florida State and why the committee has to look at things the same way they have in the past from consistency's sake. What I found most interesting about the way that all of this unfolded on Twitter Saturday night in the wake of Florida State dispatching Louisville, having all the results in front of us, the same people last year, when I told them that TCU would be a decided underdog and if they wanted the 4 best teams, TCU didn't get in there, were screaming from the rafters that TCU should have gotten in there. And I agreed with them. They were deserving. They ran the table. They lost in the conference championship. Were the exact same people that were spinning it back the other way going, well, how is Florida State in? They'd be a massive underdog against everybody. And to that you go, you guys said the same fucking thing about TCU, and what did the Horned Frogs do? They went out there and took it to Michigan because it was a bad matchup, won the game outright as a 7.5-point dog, and it was the exact same thing that we saw unfold on Friday night. Why even play the games? Oregon got bet up from 7.5, 8 out to 10. There was a little bit of resistance at the top of the market as we saw. You play the games for a reason. All of us thought Oregon was a juggernaut playing their best football. Washington proved all of us wrong. That's what the markets are. You can't just pencil teams in based on what the point spread would be, and that's something that we live by in our business that we always default to. You play the games for a reason, and every single Saturday throughout the fall, whether it's Labor Day weekend up until early in December, you have double-digit dogs that win games outright, and I can tell you guys that Florida State would have played with the world's largest chip on their shoulder in a semifinal matchup against Michigan because nobody would have given them an iota of credit, and you could see Michigan in that room when the playoff field announced that it was going to be Alabama, like the wind had been taken out of their sails. They would have come in so overconfident against Florida State. I'd have had no problem, Payne, to your point, backing the Seminoles, plus those points with Norvell's game plan, playing to Tate Rodemaker's strengths and allowing that defensive line to do exactly what Iowa did, slowing down Blake Corum, making life miserable for J.J. McCarthy.
And the added is they actually have corners that can play press man, and Michigan really doesn't have a wide receiver past Wilson who can separate from man coverage. And so the matchup in and of itself, I think, would have actually been pretty good too. And a lot of the things that these committee members don't know about teams. I mean, Keon Coleman's out there on one leg. Johnny Wilson's battling. Jaheim Bell isn't really playing because he's injured. The offensive line's rotating 8 guys because they have to. 30 days, this team would have looked vastly different than what you just watched offensively. I truly believe that.
How many starters can the committee members name on these teams? Past maybe 3, if that.
Yeah.
That's what always gets me is, for the first time this season, the committee's sitting down together and watching the games. Why aren't they doing it every week? Why are you not? I mean, it's a pretty important committee, is it not? Why is this not your job every single weekend to do this? Oh, because, this is just a thing that they put on the resume because these guys are athletic directors and conference commissioners and former head coaches. I don't understand it. I really don't.
Yeah, they're not getting paid really anything. Right, and so it's.
Oh, you can run up those expense accounts when you're staying at fancy hotels. Don't worry about them. They're not out there exactly slumming it, staying at a 1-star, rat-infested hotel, eating continental breakfast from 6 to 8 o'clock, and if they miss the window, they have to starve themselves.
My point is, they're not making a ton of money from this, and it's probably the least important thing that they have going on in their life.
Are you sure about that, though?
And this is
with
who
the TV money?
Choosing.
They line their pockets a little bit. Hey, put that team in there. Say this.
Yeah, you're probably.
I would agree that on paper, what's reported to the IRS is not there, but I'm sure there's some back channels. This is college football.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
It's pretty wild, too, when you consider that the chairman of the board, Boo Corrigan, is an ACC guy, so maybe he had an axe to grind as well with Florida State, who's been trying to leave the league.
He has no idea he just ended the conference. And fortunately, we are going to 12 teams, so you're not going to be able to use that ammunition against the Miamis and the Clemsons and the Florida States. But had we been sticking to a 4-team playoff next year, think about the recruiting implications that has for the ACC. Because every single Big Ten, every single SEC coach can be like, hey, You can go to that conference if you want.
But you're not getting to
But you can go 13-0 and you ain't getting to the college football playoff. You don't have a chance to win a national championship. So thank God it is now going to 12 because Boo would have killed his own conference.
Well, I think you led us in a perfect direction. And the final button we can put on this, Brad, when you look at the team that would have been the 12th seed had we been in next year's format now, the committee believe Liberty, by virtue of their undefeated record and awful strength of schedule, should have been that 12th team. Apparently, they didn't give any credence to SMU, finished the season 10-2, challenged themselves in the non-conference. I don't know what we're doing even at the bottom of the field there. That would have been as big an injustice as anything else, knowing that SMU probably wasn't going to pull off a major upset, but would have put up a heck of a lot more competitive fight than I think Liberty can.
I mean, that did put a button on the confusing. Best versus most deserving. They went complete opposite when it came to awarding the one bid. I mean, they went with the most deserving, the team that was unbeaten in Liberty against an SMU team, even with a backup quarterback, would be favored at minimum a field goal, if not more, over Liberty on a neutral. So they didn't go best team when it came to awarding the group of 5. And also, Mike Norvell kind of touched on this. We went out and scheduled 2 Power 5 games away from home. SMU went out and played in Oklahoma, played at TCU, challenged themselves, lost that game, actually played really well against Oklahoma. They win the toughest group of 5 conference, go on the road to the team that won the Cotton Bowl last year and really dominated them. And you tell that team, nope. I mean, you know, in this case, we're going to go with the most deserving, the unbeaten team instead of the best. I just don't get it. It's so confusing. What is it? Or, another tweet I had is it the best? Is it the most deserving? Or is it we're just doing whatever the hell we want and just fitting narratives wherever we see fit?
I think that's pretty much what it is. You can move the goalposts accordingly. There's no black and white. And it's something I never thought I would say as we kind of officially get to start eulogizing the 4-team college football playoff at the end of this year. I almost long for the BCS, where you took the human element out of it, let the computers, and everybody at least knew what the inputs were. Even if we didn't agree, you knew what they were going into that and how things were going to play themselves out to give us some of the matchups that were most deserving, given the full body of work that these teams have put together. But alas...
And the BCS had Florida State in, correct?
Yes, they had Florida State as the 4, I believe.
And that was the first time in the 10 years that the BCS method did not have all 4 teams in.
Interesting.
Yep.
So just puts all of it in perspective. We'll obviously break down the 2 semifinal games along with a lot of the other big bowls a little bit later this month, but felt this was the perfect forum and opportunity to get 2 of the most respected college football minds and you guys discussing all of this. And Brad, it's taken 600 plus episodes. This is the closest this podcast has ever become to sports talk radio, and it doesn't make me happier. Doing it through a gambling lens, getting Payne to finally buy in, unfortunately, at the expense of Florida State not getting a chance to play for the national title. You can follow Brad.
That wasn't even scorched earth either. I thought that was pretty tame.
He was very under control, which is, like I said, I'm a little bit concerned that he's been so mild-mannered, and I know all of our loyal listeners aren't Seinfeld fans, but you do wonder in the back of your mind how many times Payne has said serenity now since that game ended right about midnight Saturday night to this point, and it's coming. It's just a question of when it comes. Maybe it'll be when we break down the college football playoff games a little bit later this month. You can follow Brad on Twitter at BradPower7. You can follow Payne there as well at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. And most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Normally on Mondays, we do the good, the bad, and the ugly. We go look ahead lines. We scrap that in favor of a college football playoff discussion, but we couldn't do without the smartest man in the Bet the Board family, Dr. Deepak Shona, who provides a laundry list of impact injuries. You can follow Deepak on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard-trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
All right, let's do it. So we start with Tank Dell of my Houston Texans, and he fractured his fibula. That basically means he's probably out for the season. The average timeline on these is going to be 4 months to return. Now, the good news here is that we don't expect any lingering impact going into next season. Usually wide receivers come back at full strength and well before the start of training camp is when he's projected. Next up is Ramondre Stevenson. His video suggested a high ankle. The average on these is going to be 3 weeks, but when running backs return, even after that 3 weeks, and sometimes it takes a little longer than that, we've seen with Saquon, we've seen with Eckler, that they do tend to take a little bit of time to ramp up their efficiency on a per touch basis. And that initial return averages about 20% of a dip. And so for Ramondre Stevenson, the rest of this season is a little dicey. Amari Cooper, now he's in the concussion protocol, and actually so is Derrick Henry. So the two of them are essentially in the same boat in that most players are taking 1 week to return and then coming back the following at full strength. Now, in the past 4 weeks, we have seen several players actually clear in 1 week. Not totally sure if that is a change in the protocol or if that's just these particular players, but for example, we did see Chris Olave just play yesterday without any sort of performance dip. So when players return, they aren't projected to have any production hit, but we'll sort of have to see Amari Cooper and Derrick Henry. Both the data would favor missing 1 week and returning the following. And then Brian Robinson left the game with a hamstring. He is likely out this coming week. The average timeline on these is 2 to 3 weeks. We don't really know anything about the severity of his injury, so we'll just have to see when he returns to practice will really tell the key story, but I suspect it won't be this week. Puka Nacua, so he went down really hard. He did come back to the game, so he has what looks like an AC joint sprain of his shoulder plus a rib contusion, if you hear the comments from Sean McVay afterwards. The good news is that neither of these is likely to keep him out. The bad news is that they both do together project to give him a mild performance dip, and you may be wondering how come he didn't have that initially in yesterday's game. But the reason is, generally speaking, these things flare up over the course of 2 to 3 days after the injury itself occurs. So with Puka Nacua, he's not totally out in the clear yet, but we do suspect he will play and not miss any time. Marquise Brown, a little bit of a different story. He missed practice all week, did play, which was a little surprising, at least per the data. And he's been dealing with this heel injury that he apparently re-aggravated yesterday and caused him to miss the rest of the game without any production. So Marquise Brown, in most cases, if they had a game week 14, he would miss it. But because they have the bye, he does have a chance to come back week 15. So we'll sort of see how he returns to practice, and that'll tell the story. Kenny Pickett, a little bit of an odd case. He's got this ankle injury. They're saying he's going to undergo surgery, but only miss 2 to 4 weeks. It suggests that it may be either an ankle cleanup procedure or a tightrope procedure. It's a little hard to say from the video itself. So Kenny Pickett, in either case, when he returns for a quarterback, you wouldn't expect much of a performance hit. Having surgery suggests to me that he's probably going to be closer to that 4-week timeline, but we'll see if he misses the IR. Then I'm expecting 3 games out and returning that 4th week. Derek Carr, he's in the concussion protocol. He actually had several injuries this season and even yesterday, but Derek Carr in the concussion protocol for the second time in just a few weeks doesn't project to come back this coming week. And in fact, the following week is about 50-50 because it is, again, not his first time in the protocol in recent weeks. Justin Jefferson, now he is very likely coming back this coming week, week 14. The good news here is that wide receivers, especially this far out, don't tend to have any sort of performance hit, and they usually return straight to pre-injury levels without any lag. Justin Jefferson was likely ready to come back a couple weeks ago, but would have been a little less than 100%. At this point, the data strongly favors 100% production. Now, the key here is really re-injury risk, and I think that's why they've held him out so long as well. So keeping that in mind, if he had come back initially straight off the IR, for his age group and tier of wide receiver, the data would favor about a 15 to 20% hit re-injury risk. However, at this point, that's down somewhere closer to 10. So I think that's also a big part of the reason why they waited to return him. And so Justin Jefferson should be full go in all lineups. Travis Etienne is playing tonight. The key to remember is that Travis Etienne, with his chest contusion, does project to have a mild dip in his workload. Usually running backs don't see a performance hit or an efficiency hit rather, but they do see fewer touches. Cooper Kupp, he didn't look quite like himself yet, and the numbers I think reflect that, but they are certainly improved. And Cooper Kupp was actually dealing with 2 ankle injuries. If you watch his videos carefully over the past couple weeks, that combination of having 2 injuries does generally lead to a pretty significant performance dip. So I think next week is when you see the full Cooper Kupp back to normal. Then Noah Brown, he played despite practice data that would actually have suggested that he was going to miss, and he didn't produce really anything. He actually had no catches. But Noah Brown should improve a lot this coming week, and especially now with Tank Dell out, I'm expecting Noah Brown to look basically like his pre-injury self going into next week. Dalton Schultz, he missed week 13. He actually is probably going to miss week 14 as well, just purely based on data. We don't have any indication from the team how severe of a hamstring injury this is, but the average timeline on these is 2 to 3 weeks, and he's only missed 1. And the fact that he didn't practice at all last week does suggest that this is at least a moderate severity injury. So I would tentatively plan for missing Dalton Schultz in week 14, and week 15 being sort of a 50-50 proposition depending on when he returns to practice. Next, Dallas Goedert. He was reportedly pushing to play this week, but they kept him out. And that, of course, does suggest that he would likely come back this coming week. And I think week 14 all along has actually been the plan, in the sense that these average 5 to 7 weeks for the return. He got injured in week 9, so week 14 is, of course, 5 weeks. But also the fact that they did not place him on the IR, that to me suggests they had a plan for him to miss 3 games. And in addition to their bye week, that's basically where we are now. So Dallas Goedert, I expect him back week 14, and I don't think he's going to have much of a performance hit based on the timeline of return and the fracture data in the NFL in general. Aaron Jones, this one is dicey for week 14. I would lean towards him missing as well. The average timeline on MCL sprains tends to be in just about 2.5 weeks. But his looked pretty severe just watching the video of when it occurred. So for that reason, plus the fact that he's a little bit older for a running back, I would suspect they keep him out 1 more week. The Packers have actually tended to be on the conservative side as well. So all of that bodes not great for his week 14 availability. I do think, however, that he does return week 15. Kenneth Walker. So he's missed 2 weeks now, but they've both been Thursday night football games. So with oblique injuries, most of these do return after 2 weeks. And he's now missed 2 weeks, of course. So having him return for this past Thursday, I think is a little aggressive given the severity of his injury that was reported. But having him return this coming week, and the Seahawks are actually a pretty aggressive organization when it comes to returning players. So all of that predicts that he would return this coming week. We'll know a lot more based on when he returns to practice, but I suspect he'll start Wednesday with a limited session and then go from there. If that's the case, then if he logs 3 limited sessions, the data would favor a 2/3 chance that he plays. And if he logs even 1 full practice at the end of the week, then it goes over 70%, so very likely that he plays. Aaron Rodgers, last but definitely not least, he's given us a lot to talk about, but the Jets obviously have not. And as a result, I would be very surprised if he does come back. Coming back super early from a tendon repair means the tendon has, of course, a higher chance of re-rupture. And that would be really a catastrophic outcome in this case. But beyond that, could Aaron Rodgers return? We've talked about this a little bit before. But yes, given that he's a right-handed quarterback using his left as the injured side, I do think that he could return. I do think he would look a lot like Joe Burrow did when he had his calf re-aggravation, where you basically use the leg as a peg leg, not trying to drop back a lot, starting in the shotgun, doing some quick, short passes, and mostly using his upper body and maybe his core to really give the power to throw those balls. But you're not getting a lot of deep balls. You're definitely not getting a lot of mobility, and the re-injury risk would be very high. So all of that considered, where the Jets are in the standings, it doesn't really make sense to me that he would come back, but it is a hell of a story. And Aaron Rodgers, I think in theory, could do it. And that's all for now, so I'll kick it back over.
All right, boys. Deepak gave us some injuries. There were no hurt feelings on that list in terms of a medical report as far as I could tell, but it gives us a segue into Monday Night Football. And Brad, we can either let you out of class early, or if you want to stand here and complete the course outline, you're more than welcome to join us for a breakdown of Bengals Jags that I know you are going to be glued to the edge of your seat watching later tonight.
I'm here for it. I mean, any type of football talk, and especially talk that can maybe lead me in the right direction of making a positive EV bet.
We'll see what we can do in that regard. The market has moved a ton, though, Payne, and we're now looking on Monday morning with the Bengals a 10-point underdog for their trip to Duval County. Total on this game, 40, and we have seen major movement in these games, guys. The Jags, 7.5-point favorites on the open. We saw a little bit of money come in yesterday on the underdog. This total dipped as low as 37.5, 38, and the Jaguars will play their first Monday Night Football game since 2011. This franchise right now 14-4. The past 18 regular season games, tied for the third best winning percentage in the NFL since Week 12 last season. Meanwhile, the Bengals, they have become the model of futility, playing in primetime, losers of 15 straight when the lights are at their brightest. The trend that you're going to hear all day long, I'm sure, in gambling circles, Monday Night Football, unders 13-1 this year, average closing total right on the key of 44, but the average points scored a touchdown plus less at 35.9. The Jags, yes, they've been good straight up, but they've also been good ATS, covering 7 out of their last 8. And Payne, when we look at this Bengals team, Zach Taylor with Joe Burrow, 34, 24-1, including the playoffs. He's 4-20 with all others. It's not quite what Kyle Shanahan was with Jimmy Garoppolo and everybody else, but do the Bengals have a path with Jake Browning, and how do they go about getting him in a rhythm, knowing that you can exploit this Jaguar secondary a bit?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough, right? I mean, there was a conversation internally for Cincinnati and Zach Taylor this week, and it's basically been what you alluded to, is how can we make it easier for Jake Browning? Initially, they kind of plopped Browning into the system and pretended he was Joe Burrow because they didn't want to lose the identity of being pass first. Browning obviously doesn't have the physical tools or the ability to consistently go through the reads and progressions like Burrow, so my understanding is they want to get Browning throwing in rhythm early with one read stuff, quick throws, rollouts, bootlegs. I know the counting stats didn't look bad last week against Pittsburgh for Browning. 19 of 26, a touchdown, 227 yards passing. If you watch it, the vast majority of that came on 2 tipped passes that Chase caught and then had a ton of yak after on. And if you just look at the actual game grade, Browning had a 39, which if you extrapolate it out would make him QB 50 out of 50 on the season. Had 3 turnover-worthy throws, struggled under pressure. It'll be great, obviously, having T. Higgins back to pair with Chase, so that should help. And we'll see if it comes to fruition, but I'm hearing that Browning could be under center a touch more tonight. They think that'll help him in protection. The Bengals are 30th in pass rush win rate. I think the Bengals are certainly going to try to get the run game going. And now that Chase Brown is healthy, I would envision we see more of him tonight just based on comments from the Bengals staff. We had Brian Callahan, the Bengals OC, come out this week with a direct quote saying, We need to find out what Chase can do for us because I don't know. At this point, we do need to find out. And then you had starting offensive lineman Ted Karras come out and say, Chase has brought a great demeanor and energy. He's very fast and talented. I think he's going to be a big part of the offense moving forward. Now,
AKA Joe Mixon, you're done after this season, buddy. So dust off that resume, kind sir.
So, no matter if it's Mixon or Brown or how that workload is split, it's going to be difficult because on paper through 12 weeks, running the ball hasn't been the formula to beating the Jaguars defense. They're number one in the league in rate of runs allowed that gain 3+ yards before first contact. They're 6th in rate of runs allowed that gain 10+ yards, and that's led to being number one in schedule adjusted rush efficiency while playing the most difficult schedule of offenses in the NFL. But I think the margins are thin. If Cincinnati can somehow find its run game, they'll cover the 10. If they can't, the Jaguars' offense is going to build a lead. It's going to force Browning to be in the shotgun all night chucking where things can start to snowball at that point. But I very much think the offensive path for the Bengals is going to be a little bit more under center for Browning. Try to get the ground game fired up. Maybe some more rollouts, bootlegs, play action, one-read stuff. Does it work? I don't know, but to your point, you certainly want to attack the Jaguars through the air. A little bit vulnerable there. Have to keep an eye on Tyson Campbell. Know he was limited all week again with a hamstring. He's a key cog in that Jaguar secondary.
He keeps saying he wants to be out there and play, that he didn't come back too early in the game against the 49ers, but he's obviously missed extended periods of time. And if you're the Jags right now, suddenly you're in a legitimate division race with the Colts and Texans both winning over the weekend, keeping pace, nipping at your heels in that particular regard. So you can't take your eye off the prize. Before we get to the other side of the ball, Payne, and break down the Jags offense against the Bengals, D. Brad, I know you're a trends guy and you look at a lot of the historical data, and this has to be a somewhat unique circumstance where we have such a low total, one that has taken a little bit of over money, but with a double-digit favorite. Is there anything that says you're going to want to look to play on the favorite? You're going to want to try and make a case for the underdog from a historical perspective?
Well, I'll say that I'm never blindly betting anything when it comes to the NFL, just trend specific. But you know what I do find interesting in a league of parity is whenever I see something that I would preserve to be an outlier, that being Jacksonville favored by 10, you don't see every day. Immediately I start thinking, well, when's the last time Jacksonville was a double-digit favorite? Well, 6 years ago. So it's interesting to see how teams in outlier situations, how do they handle it playing with this type of expectation. And I'll also say this has been a trend line that isn't new, but it continues to be profitable. Double-digit favorites. Typically, I would say guys that grew up in the industry, whether it's long-term guys or even guys, maybe even our age. I mean, it's tough laying points in the NFL. We've that's been ingrained into our minds forever. But the reality is, double-digit favorites have been good the last 7-8 years. I mean, if you're blindly betting on them, the favorite, you're 58%. We're talking a sample size of over 250 games. So I just always, especially in a primetime game, there's going to be this temptation. Double-digit points for the dog or pass. And the reality is, it's been opposite. And I'm wondering if sometimes these favorites get a little cheap, believe it or not, because they're guys like us that just that don't want to lay the points, lay doubles in the NFL.
Payne, it almost feels like it's a veiled shot from Brad saying that we shouldn't be diving into the dumpster trying to back teams like the Carolina Panthers. We should be betting the better teams laying double digits and feeling a lot more comfortable with endgame situations than needing Bryce Young to pull a rabbit out of his hat down 21-10, leading a march that would make even Joe Willie Namath feel like it touched him in all the right spots in a game like that.
Favorites have done quite well this season, so I think long term Brad's point is seems to be winning, and I just think it's the league in general, right? I mean, the quarterback play is the delta between even good and bad is just so large, and I think that's why the trends are suggesting laying the points there. Listen, the Jaguars' offense has also been a little clunky this season, and I think that's why it's a little bit difficult to mentally wrap your head around laying 10. You're looking at a unit that's kind of just hovering around league average in schedule adjusted efficiency. Not at all what we expected with how Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence were trending down the stretch last season. You just figured, hey, we're going to come into this year, we're going to roll the ball out there. We have all of the same key cogs. We're going to be fine. All of a sudden, it started a little slow. We can make the excuse, well, we lost our right tackle in free agency, our left tackle suspended. Once those guys are back, we're just going to flip on the switch and go. On paper, the Jaguars' offense is stepping down in class. And for all of the Lou Anarumo love, and no doubt the adjustments in the second half over the years have been fantastic, but right now in this moment, the Bengals are 26th in adjusted efficiency. And somehow a unit with a great edge setter in Sam Hubbard, and you're paying, DJ Reader $60 million in the middle, they're fourth worst in defensive rush efficiency. So, the positive here is a little bit like Jacksonville hasn't shown an ability to run the football this year. NTN is clearly banged up. You have the left tackle Cam Robinson out. So the path that I would think is taken for Jacksonville is the quick throw game. Starting corner Cam Taylor-Britt is out again for Cincy. You have to figure out a way to keep Trevor Lawrence clean because he struggled under pressure this season, has one of the largest no pressure deltas. So you got to make sure you're getting the ball out of his hands quick if you want to attack the secondary. You're QB 28 out of 38 qualifiers in turnover-worthy play rate when pressured. Trevor Lawrence is QB 28 out of 38 in adjusted accuracy when pressured. So you kind of have to play this game where we're going to try to run, even though we haven't been good doing it. Cincinnati might just be that bad defending it, so we're going to try that. But then when we do throw it, we know Trevor struggled under pressure. He doesn't have his left tackle now, so it's got to be quick. Can we take advantage of the Bengals secondary, who's dead last in explosive play rate? Can you actually push the ball down the field? Is Trevor Lawrence going to have time to do that? So Trey Hendrickson has to be a game wrecker on defense to help protect that Bengals secondary. If not, Calvin Ridley probably has some opportunity tonight. He's been coming on strong, especially since Zay Jones returned. The Bengals have struggled against outside receivers. This is one of those games to me where, Monday night, pro bettors knew where this line would head. No one was going to want to back Jake Browning, right? So they got out, laid the Jaguars early. You get them into teasers, down to 1.5, 2 and 2.5. But at 10, a little bit of a different story. If you just thought nothing about the matchup, my feeling is just based upon the numbers, you're probably getting to 6 on a neutral. Whatever home field advantage is for the Jaguars, it's probably a little bit more in a prime time game. But in general, it's typically 1. Maybe you go to 1.5 here. And then all of a sudden you factor in like Cam Robinson's out. NTN less than 100%. T. Higgins is back. And so there's going to be some pros that talk themselves into, I think, at least value betting the 10 on Cincinnati.
Look, it makes sense. I mean, everyone doesn't land on the same side of the equation. And I think you laying out the 6, figuring out what home field is, adjusting for some of those injuries, you can easily get to a 7.5 and taking 10, an attractive proposition for a Bengals team that is still clearly playing for something, trying to keep their season right now that's on life support in the mix. But also difficult to try and do when we look at that Bengals defense that you outlined that somehow found a way to give up more than 400 yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers, a feat that I don't think any of the three of us thought was possible and may not be possible going forward, given some of the erratic quarterback play we have seen in that regard. Anything else, guys, before we close up the Monday Night Football game that you guys wanted to add that we didn't have a chance to get to?
No, I think we covered it.
All right.
Yeah,
I will take the
we're good.
I will take the silence as gold there. Brad, want to thank you for joining us on a Monday, breaking the monotony that is the sports schedule that all sports bettors strive to achieve during the course of the fall. So great perspective on that from a number standpoint, trying to outline some of the committee, the hypocrisy, and everything else we have seen there. Payne, I applaud you for your cool, calm demeanor in the wake of one of the gravest injustices we've seen in the college football world of Florida State being left out of inclusion in the college football playoff. So, gentlemen, we'll get to do this again soon for the Bulls. We'll figure out that schedule, and if we're going to touch on some of the minor games, we will clearly hit on the big games in the New Year's Six variety a lot later this month, but some scheduling quirks still to come for the most loyal Bet the Board listeners, so that's even more reason why you have to follow Brad on Twitter at BradPower7. You can follow Payne there as well. You can follow me at Todd Fuhrman. Most importantly, for all updates for the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you'd been subscribed to the Bet the Board podcast newsletter, you'd also have a prop ticket in your pocket for tonight's football game between the Bengals and Jaguars. But because I like to be a pain in the ass, not going to share that here. It's more reason to subscribe to the newsletter so you know what we're talking about when we get there. Gentlemen, have a great week. Payne will be back on Thursday, talk a little NFL. And Brad, I imagine you will be glued to your odds screen from now until Friday, 24 hours a day, waiting for all of that portal news to hit. And anything we've seen, I guess we can close on this. Anything surprise you with Kyle McCord or Dylan Gabriel entering the portal? Or do you think we have a lot more surprises in store in the next 24 to 48 hours?
When it comes to college football in 2023, nothing should surprise you. Everything's on the table.
That is a fair way to look at it for sure. Best of luck to all of you, our loyal listeners, with whatever you elect to bet on tonight's game or your early bowl handicapping, trying to lock in some of those numbers that are no doubt sure to be a little bit volatile. So for Brad Powers, Payne Insider, I'm Todd Fuhrman, and hopefully we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.